Hello, welcome back to the OffStudio where we're talking about, well, me and not JC. Welcome back to the driving times. I believe it's been way too long since I've done a driving gig, and I figured we would spend a wonderful evening drive run to talk about life today. I figured that usually a lot of my good convos or thoughts come out during these times, and I figured, hey, why not, let's talk about it. And so it's dark, I have some grooves in heart going on, and so it's fun. I am just gonna share some quick things I've just been mulling about and thinking about. So recently, I have been in a wonderful conversation with my friends, and I was bringing up a lot of little observations that I've been having. And one of them, which is I think it's something that's pretty classic. I don't know, like when I thought of it, it felt new to me. It felt like a novel thing. But when you really think about it, was it really a novel thing? I don't think so. I feel like this is something we already knew, but it kind of just clicked for me. And that is that our emotional state internally directly affects our perception of an outcome in the real world, is what I'm saying. And what that means is, for example, say you are feeling particularly off a certain day, you're not feeling well, you're feeling particularly stressed, or that kind of stuff. When situations happen, like for example, you will just start noticing all the traffic lights are turning red or something like that. Or you're noticing that, like, oh, I'm late to work and I'm stressed out and all of these things are just not going my way. It's just not my day. Versus if you had a really good, like if you woke up and had a really good mood, you almost feel sort of invincible. Like you feel like nothing can get you down, everything's pretty good or something like that. That's why I think it's really fascinating. When I thought of it, I was like, that's true, that's right. In a way, it's what my conclusion ended up being is that means that our perceptions are completely subjective, which is, I feel like, makes sense. But the conclusion I took out of this was that because it's subjective, we personally cannot actually affect reality the way we think we're affecting it, right? Like we think that life is out to get us, or life is just not doing it for us, when really life doesn't really care enough about what we're doing. The whole concept of, does the tree make a sound if no one heard it? The answer is yes, it still makes a sound. It has nothing to do with you. And I don't know, when I thought of it, I was like, that actually was very comforting to think about, because then that just means that in a way that's okay, that the void or the nothingness that we are so afraid of isn't necessarily the biggest nightmare ever, if that makes sense. And I hope you guys are following my drift here. Like, I really do think I'm onto something there when I was thinking about it. And I was like, this is actually kind of fun. And it was another one of my rationalizations that really helped me out. Well, when I was telling my friends this, because I wanted people to, I don't know, like, I want people to understand, like, when you feel something, while yes, it's valid, and while yes, it's all that and good stuff, it's also completely separate and distinct from what's going on in the real world. It's not that big of, well, I wouldn't say not that big of a deal, but it's not that big of a deal. Like, if that makes sense. Like, it's not really causing, I don't know, it's not cause for doom and gloom that we probably think about. I feel like a lot of times we embellish ourselves, or we over hyperbolize or exaggerate a lot of the problems we might be going through, or even so far as over idealize some of our successes. So the point that I wanted to make is, like, have a balanced view on a lot of the things that come on in life, because you don't always know how to, sometimes if you're emotional, I call the phenomenon being emotionally compromised. When you're emotionally compromised, what ends up happening is that you're not in a state to make decisions, you're not in a state to decide, you're not in a state to fix something, or sign some papers, or like you very likely to say something that you probably didn't really mean. And the thing is it's a phenomenon. I don't know, I feel like we stereotypically associate that with feelers, but it can also be a thinker could have a moment like this. Really could just be an emotional moment. I like to call the phenomenon an emotional compromising state, where you are at the mercy of your own feelings. Whereas when you used to be in control, or therefore used to really not care or notice how you feel, suddenly becomes very overwhelming. And when you're going through something like that, and it sucks to say because I hate this phenomenon really, but whenever it happens, you have to kind of feel through it and like let it flow through you. Like feel it for the moment for what it is, and then let it go. I feel like a lot of the situations when you're in an emotionally compromised state tends to be in a very I don't know, it's very chaotic, and it's also very difficult to rationalize and project and apply proper thinking into it, because basically it's almost as if your thinky part of your brain decided to take a vacation and was like, hey, maybe I don't want to take control of today, and maybe I just want to see you go wild. And so it happens, and you get it, and it's rough, and it's kind of insane, and you feel guilty probably like afterwards, because you feel like there's a lot of damage that was done, or there's a lot of damage control that needs to be happened, or whatever. But when you really think about it, it's that side of your brain that kind of reminds you that you're human, if that makes sense. I don't know, ever since I called it that way, being emotionally compromised, it became kind of a classic line for me whenever I want to give disclaimers for my friends, whenever I go through situations that I can't necessarily explain with logic or with any kind of reasoning. Often I would go along the lines of, I'm sorry guys, I'm feeling very emotionally compromised. I feel like I could cry at any moment. I feel like very weak. I feel very nervous, and I feel like that a lot of what I'm doing is not going to result in a good outcome. And I go through this kind of notion of saying that way to the point where my friends in return will be able to understand that, okay, well, if you're in an emotionally compromised state, you just need to take a moment, because that's for what it is. It's just a moment, and the moment passes. Like with any kind of emotion, it's not permanent. It's a very temporary phenomenon that just happened because you just were feeling overwhelmed one day and you just needed to let it happen. And it's crazy that we have to let it happen. Like, you have to let yourself feel. And I feel like a lot of the conditioning we've been having as, I don't know, growing into our adults, conditioning ourselves to put down and bury and repress and avoid dealing with our feelings, when in reality all they really need is to just be felt for a moment. Because I don't know, I think we associate or appropriate way too much doom with what could happen with it, that we forget that there is something human about that, like human about really just feeling something, and it will not actually mean catastrophe. Like if you let yourself, if it leaks, it leaks. It's not going to cause an explosion. And say that it does, the explosion isn't exactly the end of the world, if that makes any sense. So a lot of this thought process is going on in my mind for the past couple days, and it has done some wonders in how I've tried to remind people that whenever they feel something, the feeling or the emotion is valid, and they're allowed to feel, and you're not losing it, and even if you were losing it, it's not the end. I feel like we put so much fear or stigma on feelings and letting yourself be a little bit more, letting yourself into the madness. I feel like we're very afraid of what could go wrong, and then not realizing that that's also a reminder that it's an access point to some of our darker sides of ourselves that demands to be felt, but is not the end of the world when you feel it, if that makes sense. Like, so what if you wanted to say something because you felt very justified at the time? Sure, it might ruffle some feathers, and sure, you might hurt a person, but like hurt like verbally, I mean. Like it could hurt a person when you say something that's a little too blunt and you didn't really give it much thought, but you felt it. It was a very strong feeling at the time, and I feel like we shouldn't really be dismissing a person's emotions, because those are very important parts and aspects of ourselves as humans that represent, like, I don't know, I feel like we repressed it so much and there's so much shame circulating around it. So yeah, this rambling of mine while driving is a lot of this processing of how emotions are, we should really be showing it from a, like, looking at it from a more interesting study angle, observation, and take away the shame, take away the belief that it's a weakness to show this, because there's something about accessing that side of you that can be productive. I remember, like, there's a lot of times, like, for example, like, if you had a moment you wanted to cry and you're in an emotionally compromised state and you felt like maybe it's not a, it's a time to, like, let yourself feel a little bit, and maybe it's not, you don't have to be superhuman all the time, right? You don't have to be a Superman today. And I feel like we forget that we're allowed to be weak, that we're allowed to be vulnerable, and that we're allowed to experience and feel a certain way, and like accept that there's an ugly side to us that I don't know, like, right? Like, if you guys are catching my drift, that there's an ugly side to us, and that's okay, because we also live in an age where we're almost trying to pretend so much that we're okay, and that it's a measure of strength and endurance to say that you, like, let's say you didn't sleep for 3 days because you were trying really hard to get it done, and like, I sacrificed so much and now I'm awesome, and because of it, like, all my pain is, I'm gonna turn into treasure. And we praise those sacrifices. We're not realizing that you literally just really much hurt your body. Like, we're almost like we've normalized abusing our own bodies for the sake of some weird, illusionistic, my English is horrible, but it's like the illusion of financial security. And by the time let's say you did attain it, you've already caused so much really negative coping mechanisms that will result in a very unhappy present mental state, if not a more fragile and fragmented mental state. And that's not cool. I feel like we need to take a moment to realize that it's okay to say that, hey, I just want to breathe. Like, hey, I think it's okay to just take a moment, stand up, and say, maybe I should just go out for a run and, like, call it a night. And right, like, we forget that there's some things worth living for, not things worth dying for. I don't think anything is worth dying for. That's maybe that's just my perspective on it. I actually don't think there's a lot of things in life, but a lot of them are worth living for. I had this little moment too, like, with a friend, where I was asked if I was willing to die for them, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna say no. I'm not willing to die for you. I'm willing to live for you, because what use is my dead body to your survival, whatever, and basically have to suffer for the loss of my existence, whereas I could be with you, living and making it work and cheering you up with what I could do as a person that's alive. And I feel like these are things that we are forgetting, and maybe it's a time because it's COVID, because it's like a time where it's a little bit more difficult to associate with folks. It's a little bit more difficult. I don't know where that accent came from, but it's just been relatively, and I'm noticing that a lot of people's true natures are coming out. Whatever, confidence you built up pre-COVID seems to be coming out now, and you believing that you were strong is suddenly being subverted, and your true self seems to be having a moment, and everyone's now in an emotionally compromised state but also being unable to handle the new overwhelming amount of feelings. And why does it have to be overwhelming? You know, I'm going full circle with this. Why does it have to be overwhelming? Why does it have to be scary? Why does it have to, like, I understand that there's parts about us that are creepy, strange, crazy, hilarious, you know, like angry, frustrating and stuff like that, but these are all just who we are, like parts of what makes us complex. And because we, as I choose to hide certain aspects of ourselves, it leaves us at a disadvantage because we're not our complete united self. I feel like if we don't unify a lot of our traits, that we don't, like, if we don't own them and become real in that sense, like we own it and we take responsibility for a lot of our emotions and feelings, that it leaves us ill prepared and at a disadvantage when crisis happens, because some of those traits that we are ashamed of could be very helpful as motivational, inspirational, or just giving you energy to handle some of those things. If you got a lot of alter egos, I mean, all those alter egos are just a part of you. And even if you might be ashamed of them, they were there to provide you with something. They were created by yourself to handle something. And you can't be ashamed of something that was meant to protect you, because that's how you manage to keep your head afloat. Which reminds me, transitioning to a completely different tangent about the keeping your head afloat, I was learning a little observation that if you are the person whose head is afloat above water, metaphorically speaking, those around you who have not been handling it well and are drowning will typically gravitate or magnetize towards you and will start using you as a water flotation device, because you're the one that is showcased suddenly in this crisis situation that happens to have his, you know, you happen to be floating and you happen to be having a good handle on your feelings, even if you weren't, but you just seem to be getting by with your sanity. And because other people aren't, they see that and they want to be like, oh my goodness, save me. So now you're also tasked with almost like babysitting other people who should be swimming afloat just like you. And a big part of my perspective on that is realizing that this is a normal part of life. I don't want it to be a normal part of life, but it is. And it's something that happens, and I feel like this is a common thing. And I feel like because as an adult now, realizing that we're carrying the psychological homework of everybody else around you, because you happen to be the one aware of handling that kind of stuff, that it causes a lot of frustration. Like, I could understand how one could even fall into an emotionally compromised state because they're so busy trying to make sure everybody's taken care of. And I think all the more reason why we have to have the boundaries and have to have the plan, like the good mindset to say, hey, I just want to take a break, and I just want to be able to sit and say, can I breathe? Can I have a moment? I just want to have I just want to enjoy the breeze for a second here, because if we don't stop and think, we're going to eventually burn out or die. You know, people die from stress. It's a thing. Like, there's apparently psychosomatic symptoms or whatever, like they can cause your body to, like, oh, your brain's not working out, let me just show all of our issues on our body this time. And I'm like, oh no, like, I don't want that, right? Like, I think that's dangerous, and it's not smart. I feel like we need to be smarter. So it's a lot of that's going on in my brain, and a lot of that is swirling and swishing around. So these are pretty much my thoughts as I drive. So I wonder if you guys agree. Like, do you all agree with that? Do you disagree? Are there other phenomenons that you've started noticing, whatever insights it may be? I know it's dark. I don't want to put on my light because I don't want to run my battery out, and I just want to drive and talk, basically. But yeah, I just figured, like, hey, do you agree? Do y'all, disagree? Is this something that you don't, like, I don't know, I keep repeating myself. Is this something that you've personally noticed, or probably didn't even notice? Because if it isn't or is, then it's by all means something. So yeah, leave a comment, and I'll I say this before, but I'll try to reply, but we'll make it happen. We'll make it happen. So thanks again for driving with me on this not even late night, it's like a somewhat evening run with moi, as while we're on break from the studio, the off studio will continue as regularly scheduled. And yeah, hope you guys rest, enjoy. There would be updates sometime, somehow. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week, and thanks again. Good night. Bye.